And time went on. I went forward with my life. I worked. I got married, had my son.
For more than 40 years, Ginger Alden has kept quiet about what she witnessed during Elvis Presley's final days. Now, after decades of silence, she has finally decided to share a story that could change everything we thought we knew about the king of rock and roll. Her revelation is so shocking that even Elvis's own family never saw it coming. This isn't just another Elvis story. It's a confession that challenges the official version of how the world's most famous entertainer met his end. Ginger Alden was just 20 years old when she became part of Elvis Presley's inner circle. To outsiders, she might have looked like just another young woman who had caught the attention of the famous singer. But inside the gates of Graceland, she was much more than that. She was Elvis's fiancée, the woman he had chosen to spend the rest of his life with. She was the person who saw him when the cameras weren't rolling, when the crowds went home, and when the pressure of being Elvis Presley became too much to bear. Their relationship wasn't built on the glamour and excitement that most people associated with Elvis's life. Instead, it was formed in the quiet moments when he could drop his guard and be himself. Ginger saw a side of Elvis that the public never knew existed. She witnessed his struggles, his fears, and his deepest thoughts about fame and what it had done to his life. Late at night, when the rest of Graceland was quiet, Elvis would pace the halls barefoot, lost in thought. He would talk to Ginger about feeling trapped, not just by his fame, but by the version of himself that everyone expected him to be. He would wonder out loud what it would be like to just walk away from it all, to disappear and start over somewhere new where nobody knew who he was. At first, Ginger thought these were just the musings of a tired man dealing with the stress of being one of the most famous people in the world. But as time went on, she began to realize that he wasn't just talking, he was planning. Elvis had always been interested in spiritual matters and philosophy. He read books about transformation and reincarnation, and he spoke about his legacy as if it were a heavy burden rather than something to be proud of. He once told Ginger that fame was like a beautiful prison. It looked wonderful from the outside, but once you were inside, you realized you were trapped. These weren't the words of someone who was content with his life. They were the thoughts of a man who was seriously considering making a dramatic change. As their relationship deepened, Elvis began sharing more of his inner thoughts with Ginger. He would hint that someone was helping him, someone outside of his usual circle who understood how to make big changes happen quietly. He never gave her details, but the way he spoke about it made it clear that he wasn't just fantasizing. He was making real plans for something that would shock the world. During Elvis's final weeks, Ginger noticed significant changes in his behavior. He seemed more focused and determined than usual, as if he were working toward a specific goal. He stopped talking about his usual routines like recording sessions and upcoming performances. Instead, his conversations centered around ideas of starting over and reinventing himself completely. He would talk about waking up somewhere where nobody knew him, where he wouldn't be called the king anymore. When he said these things, there was no sadness in his voice. If anything, he sounded relieved. Ginger watched as Elvis began organizing his personal belongings in ways that seemed unusual. He would gather photographs, letters, and other keepsakes, carefully tucking them away. He spent time placing certain documents into envelopes, organizing them with great care. Some nights, he would be on the phone for hours, speaking quietly in a closed room. When Ginger asked who he was talking to, he would only smile and say he was talking to someone who was helping him figure things out. At first, Ginger assumed that Elvis was planning some kind of creative break or maybe a new project. But as the days passed, she began to sense that what he was preparing for was much more permanent than a simple vacation or career change. The way he was organizing his affairs and the secretive phone calls suggested that he was getting ready for something much bigger than anyone around him realized. Years later, Ginger revealed something that she had kept hidden from the world for decades. Among Elvis's personal belongings, tucked away where nobody else would find it, was a handwritten letter. This wasn't a business document or something prepared by lawyers. It was a personal note written in Elvis's own hand. The letter wasn't addressed to his attorney, his manager, or even to his family. It was simply written, sealed, and stored in a private drawer that only Ginger had access to. The letter wasn't very long, but every word carried deep meaning. In it, Elvis didn't make accusations or blame anyone for his problems. Instead, he opened up about his inner struggles and the feelings that had been eating away at him for years. He wrote about people who had once been important to him, but had become distant and transactional. He felt like these people were taking pieces of him until there was almost nothing left of the real Elvis Presley. Elvis described feeling trapped inside a version of his life that he hadn't chosen for himself. He saw himself as part of a brand, a machine, a legacy that was being operated by other people while he had little say in the matter. His thoughts in the letter were poetic and sometimes disconnected, almost like song lyrics that were never set to music. In one particularly chilling line, he wrote that he felt like he was living someone else's life. What struck Ginger most about the letter wasn't just what Elvis said, but how he said it. There was no anger in his words, just a quiet and haunting resignation. The letter read less like someone expressing frustration and more like someone saying goodbye. It was as if he were gently saying farewell to a world that had never really allowed him to breathe freely. Ginger read that letter many times over the years, and each time she noticed something new, a word, a phrase, or a pause that she hadn't seen before. And each time she asked herself the same question. Why would a man at the top of the world write a letter that sounded like a goodbye? The night before everything changed, Ginger remembered Elvis being more animated than usual. There was a spark in his eyes, like someone who had a secret that he could barely contain. He talked about plans, not vague dreams, but actual detailed steps for something big and personal. He even told Ginger to pack a small bag, just in case, and then smiled with that half-joking tone he used when he didn't want to explain too much. He said they might be taking a trip that no one would believe. Elvis spent that evening reading books on philosophy and spirituality. He made notes in the margins, wrote phrases on scraps of paper, and carefully arranged belongings near the door as if he were preparing to leave quickly. But he didn't seem afraid or panicked. If anything, he seemed calm and purposeful. He hummed to himself as he moved around, organizing things with careful attention to detail. Then, without warning, his mood changed. He became quiet and focused. He turned to Ginger and told her that he needed to be alone for a while. He said he had one last thing to take care of, and with that, he walked slowly down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows of Graceland. Ginger was left standing there, with a strange, heavy silence pressing on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that what had just happened felt like a goodbye, even though he hadn't said goodbye. Hours later, Ginger woke up to find that something wasn't right. It wasn't just that Elvis wasn't where he usually would be. The entire energy of the house felt different. His routines, those small rituals he followed like clockwork every day, had been broken. The lights he typically left on were off. His favorite chair remained untouched. His belongings were neatly in place, but something about the atmosphere felt hollow and still, as if time itself had stopped. Ginger didn't panic immediately. There were no obvious signs of trouble, no overturned furniture, no hastily written notes, no sounds of distress. There was just an overwhelming sense of absence, as if something had quietly slipped away without making any noise. She walked through the house in silence, half expecting to hear Elvis call her name from another room, but the silence continued. What struck Ginger most was that nobody else around her seemed truly alarmed by the situation. No one was asking urgent questions or seemed eager to investigate what had happened. The more she tried to make sense of that moment, the less sense it made. Years later, she still remembers that eerie stillness, not as a moment of grief, but as a mystery, as if something had been set in motion and she was the only one who had noticed it happening. In the days that followed, everything changed for Ginger Alden. She wasn't just dealing with grief, she was being quietly pushed out of the picture. The Presley family, who had once been warm and welcoming toward her, became distant and cold. Conversations were brief, eye contact was avoided, and no one asked her about what she had seen, what she had heard, or how she was coping with the loss. It was as if the events of those final hours had become too sensitive and complicated to discuss, and Ginger had somehow become an inconvenient reminder of them. When reporters and media outlets tried to reach out to her, she was told to stay silent. When she did try to speak about her experiences, gently and respectfully, her words were often taken out of context, misquoted, or ignored entirely. She found herself becoming a target, a scapegoat. the young woman that the world decided to blame without ever truly hearing her side of the story. Faced with this treatment, Ginger made the decision to disappear from the public narrative. She said little in public and kept her private thoughts to herself. But she held on to the pieces that mattered most to her. Elvis's letter, his final words to her, and the strange instructions he had whispered that last night. All of these memories were burned into her mind, becoming heavier with each passing year. She never tried to profit from what she knew. She didn't write sensational books or chase headlines. She simply waited and carried a truth that grew more difficult to bear as time went on. After more than 4 decades of silence, Ginger Alden has finally decided to share what she knows. In a private interview, conducted away from cameras and shared only with people she trusted, she let go of the truth she had been carrying all these years. There was no dramatic outburst or shocking revelation delivered with fanfare. Instead, her words came out slowly and deliberately, like someone finally releasing a breath they had been holding for decades. Yet despite the quiet way she shared her story, her words carried tremendous impact. According to Ginger, Elvis wasn't spending his final days focused on making a grand return to performing or planning new tour dates. He wasn't rehearsing for upcoming shows or working on new music. Instead, he was planning something completely different. A life beyond the stage, beyond his famous name, and beyond the relentless expectations that had followed him since he was a teenager. Elvis was planning to vanish, not out of fear or defeat, but as an act of power and freedom. He wanted to leave behind all the noise and pressure and start again somewhere distant and detached, free from the legacy that had become more of a burden than a blessing. Ginger described Elvis during those final days not as someone who was defeated or broken, but as someone who was clear-eyed, calm, and intentional about what he wanted to do. He didn't want to be remembered as a man in decline or someone who had been destroyed by fame. Instead, he wanted to be remembered as a myth, left untouched and perfect in the public's memory. According to Ginger, Elvis had both the resources and the determination to make this plan work. He had thought everything through carefully, made quiet preparations, and even dropped subtle hints about how it might all unfold, though he never gave enough details for anyone to piece the full picture together. Ginger was careful in how she told her story. She never used the word faked to describe what she believed had happened. She didn't need to use that word. The certainty in her voice and the stillness in her expression said everything that needed to be said. Her account suggests that Elvis Presley may have orchestrated the most mysterious disappearance in music history, leaving behind a legacy that would be frozen in time rather than tarnished by the struggles of aging and declining health. Throughout the decades that followed, Ginger Alden never chased fame or tried to profit from her connection to Elvis. She didn't sell sensational stories to tabloids, write tell-all books, or go on publicity tours. She held her silence not because she was afraid of speaking out, but because she believed that some things were too sacred and personal to share with the world. But as the years passed and her memories became sharper rather than faded, she says, the weight of what she knows became too heavy to carry alone. Her confession doesn't come with drama or accusations. Instead, it comes with a quiet kind of heartbreak, the kind that comes from loving someone who may have chosen to disappear rather than be destroyed by the very fame that made him a legend. Even now, Ginger won't say certain things out loud, but her words, her tone, and her timing have opened a door to possibilities that were never considered before. Ginger Alden's story forces us to consider a shocking possibility. What if Elvis Presley didn't meet a tragic end inside Graceland? What if instead he carefully planned and executed the most elaborate disappearing act in entertainment history, with only one person knowing the real truth? What if the king of rock and roll chose to walk away from his throne while he was still on top, rather than let the world watch him fall from grace? This revelation doesn't just challenge what we thought we knew about Elvis's death. It reframes his entire legacy. If Ginger's account is true, then Elvis's final act wasn't one of defeat or decline, but one of incredible courage and determination. It would mean that he took control of his own story in the most dramatic way possible, ensuring that he would be remembered forever as the young, dynamic performer who changed music forever, rather than as someone who was brought low by the pressures of fame. The implications of Ginger's confession extend far beyond just changing how we view Elvis's final days. It suggests that sometimes the truth is so extraordinary that it takes decades for someone to find the courage to share it. It reminds us that behind every legend is a human being who struggled with real problems and made impossible choices. And it leaves us with the haunting question of whether the greatest magic trick in entertainment history happened not on a stage, but in the quiet halls of Graceland on a summer day in 1977. Whether we choose to believe Ginger Alden's account or not, her story serves as a powerful reminder that there are always more layers to every story than what appears on the surface. Sometimes the truth doesn't die with those who lived it. It just waits patiently until someone finds the strength to set it free.